Welcome to Boring Nightmares, where we unravel the chilling mysteries of missing persons cases that haunt the shadows of the ordinary. Subscribe now to join us in piecing together the stories that refuse to be forgotten. The mist hung thick over the ancient peaks of the Great Smoky Mountains on the morning of October 15th, 1988, when Sarah Mitchell laced up her hiking boots for what should have been a routine day hike on the Appalachian Trail. 26 years old, an experienced hiker from Nashville with over a decade of backcountry experience, Sarah had conquered some of the most challenging trails across Tennessee and North Carolina. She was known among her hiking group for her meticulous preparation, always carrying more gear than necessary, always informing multiple people of her exact route and expected return time. That crisp autumn morning, she told her roommate she'd be taking the trail from Clingman's Dome to Charlie's Bunyan, a moderately challenging 8-mile round trip that she'd completed dozens of times before. The forecast called for partly cloudy skies with temperatures in the mid 60s, perfect hiking weather. She packed her usual gear, a bright red day pack containing water, snacks, a first aid kit, rain gear, and emergency supplies. Her car, a blue 1985 Honda Civic, was found that evening in the Clingman's Dome parking lot, exactly where she'd left it, keys locked inside as was her habit to prevent theft. When Sarah failed to return by her planned 6 p.m. check-in time, her roommate Jennifer waited until 8 p.m. before calling park rangers, knowing Sarah's obsessive punctuality made even a 2-hour delay completely out of character. Park Ranger Tom Bradley took the initial report, noting that while Sarah was an experienced hiker, the section of trail she'd chosen included some of the most treacherous terrain in the park. The trail to Charlie's Bunyan follows a narrow ridgeline with steep drop-offs on both sides, sections where the path is only a few feet wide, with 1,000-foot precipices just steps away. Weather conditions can change rapidly at the 6,000-foot elevation, and even experienced hikers have been known to become disoriented when sudden fog rolls in. Bradley immediately initiated a preliminary search, dispatching 2 rangers to hike the trail with high-powered flashlights, calling Sarah's name and listening for any response. The initial search revealed nothing unusual, no signs of disturbance, no personal items along the trail, and no response to their calls echoing through the darkness. By dawn on October 16th, a full-scale search and rescue operation was underway, coordinated by Chief Ranger Michael Davidson, a 20-year veteran of Smoky Mountains SAR operations. The search team included 40 volunteers from local hiking clubs, 12 park rangers, a specialized K-9 unit from Tennessee Emergency Management, and a helicopter crew from the National Guard. The operation began with a systematic grid search of the main trail and all connecting side trails within a 2-mile radius of Sarah's intended route. Search dogs were deployed at multiple points along the trail, working to pick up any scent trail that might indicate where Sarah had left the established path. The dense rhododendron thickets and steep terrain made progress painfully slow, with searchers often having to use ropes and climbing equipment to access remote areas below the main trail. Visibility was limited to just a few feet in many areas due to the thick undergrowth, meaning that someone could be lying injured just yards away and remain completely invisible to searchers. The helicopter search proved equally challenging, as the thick forest canopy obscured most of the ground from aerial view, and the mountainous terrain created dangerous downdrafts and wind shears that limited flight time and search patterns. Pilot Captain James Morrison, flying an OH-58 Kiowa, reported that even with thermal imaging equipment, the dense tree cover made it nearly impossible to detect body heat signatures from above. The search area was expanded daily as no trace of Sarah emerged, eventually covering over 50 square miles of some of the most rugged terrain in the southeastern United States. Teams rappelled into deep gorges, explored cave systems, and followed every stream and waterfall within the expanded search perimeter. Weather became a significant factor as autumn rains turned the already challenging terrain into a slippery, muddy maze, while dropping temperatures raised concerns about Sarah's survival, even if she were injured but alive. After 5 days of intensive searching involving over 200 volunteers and professional rescuers, the operation was scaled back to a limited ongoing investigation. No trace of Sarah had been found, no personal items, no footprints off the main trail, no fabric caught on branches, nothing to indicate where she might have gone or what might have happened to her. The lack of any physical evidence was particularly puzzling to experienced searchers who noted that even in cases where bodies are never recovered, some trace evidence typically remains. Search teams had covered every accessible area within a reasonable distance of the trail, including numerous false leads from hikers who reported seeing a woman matching Sarah's description on various trails throughout the park. Each lead was thoroughly investigated and ruled out, leaving investigators with no viable theories about her disappearance. The case was officially classified as a missing person investigation, with Sarah's information entered into national databases and her photograph distributed to park services throughout the region. Sarah's family, devastated by her disappearance, refused to accept that she had simply vanished without a trace. Her parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, traveled from their home in Memphis to establish a base of operations in Gatlinburg, spending their life savings on private investigators and additional search efforts. They organized volunteer search parties every weekend for months, methodically covering areas they believed might have been missed by the official search. Linda Mitchell became convinced that Sarah had been abducted, pointing to the complete absence of any evidence as proof that her daughter hadn't simply fallen or become lost in the wilderness. Robert Mitchell focused on the possibility of an undiscovered cave system or hidden ravine where Sarah's body might be concealed, spending countless hours poring over geological surveys and topographical maps. The family's anguish was compounded by well-meaning but ultimately cruel false hope. As psychics, fortune tellers, and amateur investigators contacted them with theories and claimed sightings that invariably led nowhere. As winter settled over the Great Smoky Mountains, the harsh reality began to set in that Sarah Mitchell might never be found. The Park Service continued to include her case in their regular patrol briefings, and rangers were instructed to remain alert for any signs of her presence or remains during their routine duties. However, the focus necessarily shifted to other emergencies and ongoing operations as the busy hiking season ended and winter brought its own set of challenges. Snow and ice made many areas of the park completely inaccessible, effectively halting any possibility of ground searching until spring. The case began to fade from local news coverage, though it remained an open investigation and a source of ongoing pain for everyone who had known Sarah or participated in the search efforts. The psychological impact on the search and rescue personnel was significant, particularly for those who had worked the case most intensively. Ranger Tom Bradley, who had taken the initial missing person report, found himself repeatedly questioning whether he had missed some crucial detail or failed to ask the right questions. The complete absence of any trace evidence was unprecedented in his experience, and it haunted him throughout the long winter months. Chief Ranger Davidson, who had coordinated similar searches for over 2 decades, later described the Sarah Mitchell case as the most baffling disappearance he had ever encountered. The lack of any physical evidence defied every pattern and precedent in his extensive experience with wilderness search and rescue operations. Other rangers reported having dreams about finding Sarah, only to wake up and remember that she was still missing, still somewhere out there in the vast wilderness. As spring returned to the Smokies in 1989, the Mitchell family resumed their private search efforts, bringing in cadaver dogs and ground penetrating radar equipment to search areas they believed might contain hidden graves or natural burial sites. They expanded their search to include the theory that Sarah might have been the victim of foul play, possibly by someone she encountered on the trail or even someone who had been stalking her. Private investigator Harold Ross, hired by the family, noted that the complete absence of evidence could actually support a criminal abduction scenario, where someone had specifically planned to make Sarah disappear without a trace. However, this theory was complicated by the remote location and the fact that Sarah had been hiking alone on a trail that sees relatively few visitors, making it unlikely that someone could have planned an encounter with her specifically. The months passed with agonizing slowness for the Mitchell family, punctuated by occasional false hopes when hikers reported finding personal items or remains that might belong to Sarah. Each report triggered a new surge of hope and anxiety, followed inevitably by disappointment when the items proved to belong to someone else or were unrelated to her case. The emotional toll was devastating, particularly on Linda Mitchell, who began suffering from severe anxiety and depression. The family's finances were strained to the breaking point by the costs of private investigators, search equipment, and extended stays in Tennessee. Robert Mitchell was forced to take early retirement from his job as an engineer to focus full time on searching for his daughter, a decision that further complicated the family's situation. Ranger Patricia Hendricks had been working in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 8 years when Sarah Mitchell disappeared, but she had been assigned to a different district during the initial search operation. A former military police officer turned park ranger, Hendricks was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to spot evidence that others might miss. She had been involved in numerous search and rescue operations throughout her career and had developed an almost intuitive sense for reading terrain and understanding how people might move through the wilderness when lost or injured. Hendricks made it a practice to review cold case files during slow periods, believing that fresh eyes might spot something that had been overlooked during the intensity of an active search operation. The Sarah Mitchell case particularly intrigued her because of the complete absence of any physical evidence, which seemed almost impossible given the extensive search that had been conducted. In early April 1989, Hendricks requested permission to conduct her own informal review of the search area, focusing specifically on locations that might have been given less attention during the original operation. She theorized that searchers, working under time pressure and focusing on the most likely scenarios, might have overlooked some of the more remote and inaccessible areas. Her approach was methodical and patient, spending entire days exploring single ravines or ridge systems that would have been covered quickly by teams focused on rapid area coverage. Hendricks paid particular attention to areas where natural features, like rock slides, fallen trees, or seasonal water flow, might have changed the landscape since Sarah's disappearance, potentially concealing evidence that had been visible months earlier. On April 23rd, 1989, exactly 6 months and 8 days after Sarah Mitchell's disappearance, Ranger Hendricks was conducting a solo patrol in an area approximately 3 miles southeast of the Charlie's Bunyan Trail, well outside the original search perimeter. This section of the park was characterized by extremely steep terrain, dense vegetation, and numerous small streams that carved deep channels through the mountainside. The area was rarely visited by hikers due to its difficulty and the absence of established trails, making it an unlikely destination for someone like Sarah, who was known to stick to marked routes. However, Hendricks had theorized that if Sarah had become disoriented in fog or darkness, she might have followed a stream downhill, a common behavior among lost hikers seeking easier terrain and hoping to find civilization. As Hendricks worked her way down a particularly steep ravine, following what appeared to be an old deer trail, she noticed something that made her pause. Partially concealed beneath a fallen log and covered by 6 months of accumulated leaves and debris, she spotted what appeared to be a flash of red fabric. Her heart began racing as she carefully approached the spot, remembering that Sarah Mitchell had been carrying a bright red backpack. Using a stick to carefully move aside the natural debris, Hendricks uncovered what was unmistakably human-made fabric, weathered and faded, but still recognizably red. As she continued to carefully excavate the area, more items began to emerge from beneath the natural covering of leaves, branches, and forest debris that had accumulated over the long winter months. The discovery site was unlike anything Hendricks had encountered in her years of search and rescue work. Sarah's red backpack was there, along with her hiking boots, water bottles, and other personal items, but they were arranged in a way that seemed almost deliberate. The backpack was positioned upright against a tree, as if it had been carefully placed rather than dropped or thrown. Her boots were side by side, laces neatly tied, positioned as if she had simply stepped out of them. Most disturbing of all, Sarah's clothing was folded in neat piles, sorted by type, with her jacket on top as if it had been the last item removed. The arrangement was so orderly, so methodical, that it seemed impossible it could have resulted from an accident, animal activity, or natural processes. But Sarah herself was nowhere to be found. Despite the presence of all her personal belongings, despite the careful arrangement that suggested human involvement, there was no sign of Sarah Mitchell herself. No bones, no hair, no tissue, nothing to indicate what had happened to her after her belongings had been left in this remote ravine. Hendricks immediately secured the scene and called for backup, knowing that what she had discovered would reopen the case and potentially change everything investigators thought they knew about Sarah's disappearance. The discovery of Sarah's belongings in that remote ravine sent shockwaves through the investigation team and her family. Here was tangible proof that Sarah had been in the mountains, yet her backpack, boots, and clothing were found miles from where she had last been seen, in a location that defied logical explanation. The items were arranged with an almost deliberate precision that made everyone uncomfortable. Her hiking boots were placed side by side, laces tied neatly. Her backpack sat upright against a fallen log, zippers closed, contents surprisingly well preserved despite months of exposure to the elements. Most unsettling of all, her jacket was folded and placed on top of a flat rock, as if someone had carefully prepared a display. The scene felt orchestrated, intentional, and deeply wrong. Ranger Patricia Hendricks would later describe the moment as one of the most disturbing discoveries of her career. She had been conducting a routine survey of the area, checking for trail damage after the harsh winter, when she spotted a flash of familiar blue fabric through the trees. As she approached, her heart began to race. The blue belonged to Sarah's distinctive jacket, one that had been described in missing person reports and burned into the memory of every searcher who had participated in the original operation. But what Patricia found wasn't just a piece of abandoned clothing caught on a branch or discarded by a panicked hiker. This was something else entirely. The arrangement of the items suggested human involvement, but the location made no sense. The ravine was nearly 3 miles from Sarah's planned route, accessible only by bushwhacking through dense undergrowth and navigating steep, treacherous terrain that would challenge even experienced hikers. The condition of Sarah's belongings raised immediate questions about the timeline of her disappearance. Despite being exposed to harsh mountain weather for 6 months, including heavy snows and spring thaws, the items showed surprisingly little deterioration. The backpack's fabric was intact, the zippers still functional. Inside, investigators found her wallet with identification and credit cards, a water bottle still half full, energy bars in their original packaging, and most bizarrely, a journal with entries dated up to 3 days after she had been reported missing. The handwriting appeared to be Sarah's, though forensic analysis would later reveal inconsistencies that suggested either extreme duress or possible forgery. The journal entries became increasingly erratic and disjointed, describing feelings of being watched, hearing voices in the forest, and experiencing episodes of lost time where she couldn't account for hours or even entire days. The location where the belongings were discovered presented its own set of mysteries that troubled experienced mountaineers and search specialists. The ravine was situated in an area known locally as Devil's Hollow, a name that had persisted for generations among the mountain folk who lived in the region before the national park was established. The terrain was notoriously difficult to navigate, with loose shale that made footing treacherous and dense rhododendron thickets that formed nearly impenetrable barriers. More puzzling still, there were no clear paths leading to the site, no broken branches or disturbed vegetation that would indicate someone had forced their way through the undergrowth. It was as if the items had simply materialized in that spot, defying the basic laws of how objects move through dense forest terrain. Search dogs brought to the scene showed unusual behavior, becoming agitated and refusing to follow scent trails, something that veteran handlers had rarely witnessed in their years of experience. The forensic examination of Sarah's belongings revealed details that deepened the mystery rather than providing answers. Soil analysis showed that the items had indeed been in that location for an extended period, ruling out the possibility that they had been planted recently to mislead investigators. However, the pattern of weathering and decomposition was inconsistent with 6 months of exposure to the elements. Some items showed extensive wear and damage, while others appeared almost pristine. Her leather hiking boots, for instance, showed significant cracking and fading, consistent with prolonged exposure to moisture and temperature fluctuations. Yet her nylon backpack looked as if it had been purchased weeks rather than months earlier. The water bottle contained liquid that, when tested, proved to be ordinary spring water, but with mineral concentrations that didn't match any known water sources in the immediate area. Most disturbing of all, several items tested positive for human DNA that didn't match Sarah's genetic profile, suggesting that someone else had handled her belongings, though the samples were too degraded to provide a clear identification. The discovery forced investigators to completely reassess their understanding of Sarah's disappearance. The original theory had been that she had suffered an accident, perhaps a fall or sudden medical emergency, somewhere along her planned route. The massive search operation had focused on areas within a reasonable distance of where she was last seen, operating under the assumption that an injured hiker wouldn't be able to travel far from established trails. But the location of her belongings suggested either that Sarah had voluntarily deviated significantly from her planned route, or that her belongings had been moved by someone else after her disappearance. Neither possibility was comforting. If Sarah had chosen to venture into Devil's Hollow, it raised questions about her mental state and decision-making processes that contradicted everything her family and friends knew about her cautious, methodical approach to hiking. If someone else had moved her belongings, it implied a level of human involvement that transformed the case from a missing person investigation into something far more sinister. The discovery also revealed the limitations of the original search effort, despite its impressive scale and thoroughness. The area where Sarah's belongings were found had been outside the initial search perimeter, deemed too remote and inaccessible to warrant immediate attention. Search coordinators had made reasonable decisions based on available information, focusing their limited resources on areas where Sarah was most likely to be found. But the mountains had proved once again that human logic and wilderness reality don't always align. The terrain that seemed impossibly difficult to navigate for a lost hiker had somehow become the final resting place for her most personal possessions. This realization haunted the search team members, many of whom had devoted weeks of their lives to finding Sarah, wondering if different decisions might have led to a different outcome. Sarah's family received the news of the discovery with a mixture of hope and dread. Finally, there was proof that their daughter had been in the mountains, validation that their months of searching and pleading for continued investigation had been justified. But the strange circumstances surrounding the find raised more questions than it answered. Where was Sarah herself? How had her belongings ended up in such a remote location? And why had they been arranged in such a deliberate, almost ritualistic manner? The journal entries in particular provided a window into Sarah's final days that was both heartbreaking and deeply troubling. The progression from normal hiking observations to increasingly paranoid and disjointed thoughts suggested either a severe psychological break or experiences that defied rational explanation. Either possibility was devastating for a family desperate for answers and closure. The local community's reaction to the discovery was intense and polarized. Some residents had always believed that there were dangers in the mountains beyond what park officials acknowledged, and Sarah's case seemed to validate their concerns. Stories emerged of other hikers who had reported feeling watched or followed in remote areas of the park, experiences that had been dismissed as imagination or the normal anxiety that comes with wilderness solitude. Others pointed to the unusual animal behavior that had been reported in the area around Devil's Hollow, including sightings of bears and other wildlife acting aggressively or appearing in places where they were rarely seen. Local folklore, which had been passed down through generations of mountain families, spoke of areas in the high country that were best avoided, places where people had disappeared or experienced things that couldn't be easily explained. The discovery of Sarah's belongings in Devil's Hollow seemed to lend credence to these old warnings that had been dismissed by modern hikers and park officials as superstition. The media attention surrounding the discovery brought both benefits and complications to the ongoing investigation. National news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting images of the remote ravine and interviewing family members about their ongoing search for answers. The publicity generated new tips and potential leads, including reports from hikers who claimed to have seen Sarah or encountered strange situations in the park around the time of her disappearance. However, the media coverage also attracted attention from conspiracy theorists and amateur investigators who proposed increasingly outlandish explanations for what had happened. The internet buzzed with theories ranging from government cover ups to supernatural abductions, creating a noise that made it difficult for legitimate investigators to separate credible information from speculation and fantasy. The psychological impact of the discovery on the search and rescue community was profound and lasting. Many of the volunteers who had participated in the original search effort felt a complex mixture of vindication and guilt. They had been right to believe that Sarah was somewhere in the mountains, but wrong about where to look. The discovery highlighted the inherent limitations of search and rescue operations in vast wilderness areas, where even the most thorough efforts can miss crucial evidence. Some veteran searchers questioned whether they had made the right decisions, whether different strategies might have led to finding Sarah's belongings sooner and potentially finding Sarah herself. The emotional toll of these second guessing thoughts contributed to what some rescue workers describe as a form of survivor's guilt, wondering if their failure to search every possible location had contributed to a tragic outcome. The strange arrangement of Sarah's belongings became a focal point for behavioral analysts and criminal profilers who were brought in to consult on the case. The deliberate placement of the items suggested several possible scenarios, none of them particularly comforting. One theory was that Sarah herself had arranged her belongings in this manner, perhaps during a period of psychological distress or confusion. The journal entries supported this possibility, showing a progressive deterioration in her mental state that might have led to irrational behavior. Another possibility was that someone else had found Sarah's belongings and arranged them for reasons unknown, perhaps as some kind of memorial or message. The most disturbing theory was that the arrangement was intentional, designed to send a message or mark a significant location, suggesting that Sarah's disappearance was not accidental, but the result of foul play. Each theory had implications that were difficult for her family and investigators to accept. The forensic analysis of the journal entries revealed handwriting that was consistent with Sarah's known samples, but showed signs of stress and deterioration that suggested the entries were written under extreme duress. The content of the entries painted a picture of someone who felt increasingly isolated and paranoid, describing sensations of being watched and followed that grew more intense with each passing day. Some entries mentioned hearing voices or sounds that seemed to come from no identifiable source, experiences that could be attributed to the psychological effects of prolonged isolation and stress, or to something more sinister. The final entries became increasingly incoherent, with words and phrases that seemed to reference locations or events that investigators couldn't identify. The handwriting in these final entries showed signs of tremor and inconsistency that suggested either physical illness or extreme emotional distress. The discovery of Sarah's belongings also revealed the complex relationship between official search efforts and the ongoing private investigations conducted by her family and friends. While park officials had eventually scaled back their search operations, declaring them suspended due to weather conditions and resource limitations, Sarah's family had never stopped looking. They had organized their own search parties, hired private investigators, and continued to explore areas that had been deemed too remote or dangerous for official search teams. The fact that her belongings were eventually found not by professional searchers, but by a volunteer conducting routine trail maintenance, highlighted the limitations of bureaucratic approaches to wilderness search and rescue. It also validated the persistent efforts of family members who had refused to accept that their loved one was simply gone without a trace. The location of the discovery raised questions about the accuracy of initial witness statements and the timeline of Sarah's disappearance. If her belongings had been in Devil's Hollow for months, it suggested that she had deviated from her planned route much earlier than anyone had realized. This possibility forced investigators to reconsider the entire sequence of events, looking for clues they might have missed about Sarah's intentions or state of mind on the day she disappeared. The journal entries provided some insight, suggesting that Sarah had become increasingly interested in exploring off-trail areas and had been reading about remote locations in the park that were rarely visited by other hikers. This information hadn't been shared with investigators during the original search, either because family members hadn't thought it relevant or because Sarah had kept these interests private. The discovery also highlighted the ongoing dangers faced by search and rescue personnel who risk their own safety to look for missing hikers. The terrain around Devil's Hollow was so treacherous that accessing the site required specialized equipment and experienced climbers. Several searchers were injured during the recovery operation, including one who suffered a serious fall while attempting to document the scene. These incidents served as a stark reminder that wilderness search and rescue operations always involve calculated risks, and that the people who volunteer for these dangerous missions are often putting their own lives on the line for strangers. The dedication of these individuals was particularly poignant in Sarah's case, where the mysterious circumstances of her disappearance had captured the imagination and concern of the entire search community. The strange circumstances surrounding the discovery of Sarah's belongings transformed her case from a typical missing person investigation into something that would be debated and analyzed for years to come. The combination of the remote location, the deliberate arrangement of items, the contradictory physical evidence, and the disturbing journal entries created a puzzle that seemed to defy conventional explanation. Some investigators believed that the key to understanding what happened to Sarah lay in deciphering the meaning behind the arrangement of her belongings and the cryptic final entries in her journal. Others focused on the physical evidence, looking for DNA traces or other forensic clues that might identify who else had been involved in moving or handling her possessions. The case became a study in the limitations of traditional investigative techniques when confronted with circumstances that fall outside normal patterns of human behavior. The discovery of Sarah Mitchell's belongings in Devil's Hollow 6 months after her disappearance marked the beginning of a new chapter in a mystery that would continue to haunt the Great Smoky Mountains for decades to come. The careful arrangement of her possessions, the disturbing journal entries, and the remote location where they were found raised questions that conventional investigation techniques seemed unable to answer. For her family, the discovery provided proof that Sarah had indeed been in the mountains, but it also opened up new avenues of anguish and uncertainty about what had happened to her in those final, desperate days. The case would become a touchstone for discussions about wilderness safety, the limitations of search and rescue operations, and the enduring mysteries that lurk in the remote corners of America's most pristine landscapes. The forensic analysis of Sarah's belongings revealed disturbing inconsistencies that deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance. The backpack, despite being exposed to 6 months of brutal mountain weather, showed almost no signs of deterioration. The nylon fabric remained intact, the zippers functioned perfectly, and even the leather straps maintained their original color and flexibility. Forensic experts examining the items noted that typical exposure to the Smoky Mountains' harsh conditions would have caused significant fading, mold growth, and material breakdown within weeks, not months. The pristine condition of these items suggested they had been protected from the elements, possibly stored elsewhere before being deliberately placed in the ravine. Most puzzling was the absence of any insect damage or animal interference, despite the location being rich with wildlife known to investigate human scents. The placement itself appeared intentional, with each item positioned with an almost ceremonial precision that contradicted any natural dispersion pattern. Even more unsettling was the discovery of fresh scratches on several metal components of the backpack, scratches that appeared recent, despite the supposed months of exposure. The forensic team's preliminary report concluded that the scene had been staged, though by whom and for what purpose remained completely unknown. Sarah's journal entries, recovered from a waterproof pouch within the backpack, painted a disturbing picture of her final days that challenged everything investigators thought they knew about her disappearance. The handwriting, confirmed through analysis to be authentically hers, documented a progressive descent into confusion and terror that began even before she entered the mountains. Early entries described vivid nightmares featuring shadowy figures watching her from tree lines, dreams so realistic she questioned whether they were memories rather than sleep induced visions. As the entries progressed, the handwriting became increasingly erratic, with some passages written in what appeared to be a desperate hurry, while others showed the careful, deliberate strokes of someone fighting to maintain control. She wrote about hearing voices calling her name from directions where no hikers should have been, voices that seemed to know intimate details about her life and fears. The most chilling entry, dated 2 days before her reported disappearance, described feeling compelled to leave the marked trail, as if something was drawing her deeper into the wilderness against her better judgment. The journal's final pages contained symbols and markings that bore no resemblance to any known language or code, drawn with such force that the pen had torn through the paper in several places. The location where Ranger Hendricks discovered the belongings defied logical explanation and challenged conventional understanding of wilderness search protocols. The ravine sat nearly 3 miles from Sarah's last confirmed location, requiring navigation through some of the most treacherous terrain in the Great Smoky Mountains. The route between the 2 points included vertical rock faces, dense rhododendron thickets that formed impenetrable barriers, and multiple stream crossings over fast moving water that would have been particularly dangerous for a solo hiker. Search teams had initially dismissed this area as impossible for Sarah to have reached on foot, particularly given her known hiking experience and the practical limitations of her equipment. The ravine itself was accessible only through a narrow opening concealed by fallen logs and overgrown vegetation, creating a natural hiding place that would have required intimate knowledge of the terrain to locate. Most disturbing was the discovery that accessing this location would have necessitated Sarah traveling in the opposite direction from all logical routes back to civilization, suggesting either severe disorientation or some external force compelling her movement. Geological surveys of the area revealed no caves or natural shelters where someone could have survived for extended periods, yet the condition of her belongings suggested they had been protected from the elements somewhere before their placement. The positioning of items within the ravine followed no pattern consistent with natural displacement by weather or animals, instead appearing arranged with deliberate intention that investigators could not decipher. The psychological profile developed from Sarah's journal entries revealed a dramatic departure from her established character that baffled both investigators and those who knew her personally. Friends and family consistently described her as methodical, cautious, and mentally stable, someone who approached hiking with careful preparation and never took unnecessary risks. The paranoid ideation and progressive disorientation documented in her journal stood in stark contrast to this established pattern, suggesting either a sudden onset of psychological disturbance or exposure to external factors that induced these symptoms. Mental health experts consulting on the case noted that while stress induced psychosis could theoretically manifest during high pressure situations, the specific nature of Sarah's documented experiences seemed unusually coherent and detailed for typical psychological breaks. The progression of her mental state, as recorded in the journal, showed a systematic deterioration that followed patterns more consistent with external influence than internal psychological collapse. Particularly concerning was her documented awareness of her changing mental state, with several entries acknowledging that her thoughts and perceptions didn't align with reality, yet describing an inability to resist the compulsions she was experiencing. The temporal progression of her psychological decline, compressed into just a few days, according to the journal dates, was unusually rapid for most forms of mental illness, leading some experts to speculate about possible environmental factors or unknown influences affecting her cognitive function. The forensic timeline reconstruction revealed impossible gaps and contradictions that challenged the basic facts of Sarah's disappearance. Based on the journal entries and physical evidence, investigators attempted to piece together her movements during the crucial final days, but the timeline contained logical impossibilities that defied explanation. Her last confirmed sighting by fellow hikers occurred on a Tuesday afternoon, yet journal entries bearing Wednesday and Thursday dates described events and locations that couldn't be reconciled with her known position or capabilities. The physical distance between locations mentioned in her later journal entries would have required travel times exceeding the hours available, even assuming continuous movement without rest or sleep. More puzzling were references to weather conditions in her journal that didn't match meteorological records for the area during that time period, including descriptions of heavy snow in October when temperatures remained well above freezing. Some journal entries contained details about trail conditions and landmarks that were accurate for areas she couldn't have possibly reached, suggesting either supernatural knowledge or the involvement of someone else with intimate familiarity of the terrain. The final entries, those containing the frantic repetitions and strange symbols, bore timestamps that would have placed her writing after the official search had begun. Yet search teams found no trace of recent human presence in any of the areas they covered. This temporal impossibility suggested either deliberate misdirection in the journal entries or circumstances beyond conventional understanding. The discovery of Sarah's personal effects sparked intense debate within the search and rescue community about the limitations of wilderness search protocols and the fallibility of human perception in extreme environments. Experienced search coordinators, some with decades of wilderness rescue experience, admitted that the location where the items were found had been within their expanded search perimeter, but had been deemed inaccessible and therefore eliminated from systematic coverage. This decision, while logical given resource constraints and apparent physical barriers, highlighted how even the most thorough search efforts could miss crucial evidence when operating under assumptions about human movement capabilities and logical behavior patterns. The revelation that Sarah's belongings were hidden in such an unlikely location forced a reevaluation of search methodologies and raised uncomfortable questions about how many other missing persons cases might involve evidence concealed in areas dismissed as improbable. Professional search teams began incorporating new protocols requiring investigation of seemingly inaccessible locations, acknowledging that human behavior under extreme stress often defies rational prediction. The case became a catalyst for developing new search technologies specifically designed to investigate areas previously considered beyond human reach, including specialized drone equipment and advanced ground penetrating radar systems capable of detecting anomalies in dense vegetation. The condition of Sarah's hiking boots, found separately from her other belongings, provided the most disturbing evidence of all and suggested circumstances that investigators were reluctant to officially acknowledge. The boots were discovered approximately 50 yards from the main cache of items, positioned upright and facing toward the ravine opening, as if their owner had simply stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. The soles showed wear patterns consistent with the treacherous terrain between Sarah's last known location and the ravine, confirming that she had indeed made the impossible journey on foot. However, the interior of the boots contained traces of blood and what forensic analysis later confirmed to be human tissue, suggesting traumatic injury to her feet during the final stages of her journey. Most unsettling was the discovery of small puncture wounds in the leather, wounds that didn't match any known tool or natural hazard in the area and appeared to have been made from the inside out. The laces had been removed and tied together to form a crude rope like construction, found coiled nearby with one end bearing fresh scratches, suggesting it had been used to lower or pull something heavy. Forensic examination of the boot leather revealed microscopic traces of an unknown organic compound that didn't match any naturally occurring substances in the Smoky Mountains ecosystem, leading to speculation about exposure to chemical agents or biological materials not indigenous to the region. The investigation into Sarah's background revealed unsettling connections that had been overlooked during the initial search phase and suggested her disappearance might not have been entirely random. Careful examination of her personal communications and social media activity in the weeks preceding her hiking trip uncovered references to feeling watched and followed, concerns she had dismissed as work related stress, but which took on new significance in light of her journal entries. Credit card records showed unusual purchases in the days before her trip, including items not typically associated with hiking, such as a compass with specialized markings and a notebook filled with what appeared to be hand copied maps of unmarked trail systems. Phone records revealed several calls to and from numbers that couldn't be traced to known contacts, with some conversations occurring at unusual hours and lasting significantly longer than her typical communication patterns. Her laptop browser history, recovered from her apartment, contained extensive research into local folklore and historical accounts of disappearances in the Smoky Mountains, research that seemed to focus on cases sharing similar characteristics to her own eventual vanishing. Most disturbing was the discovery of a series of emails to an unknown recipient discussing her intention to investigate something she referred to only as the pattern. Emails written in language that suggested she believed she was undertaking some form of deliberate investigation rather than a recreational hiking trip. The impact of Sarah's case on her family extended far beyond typical grief and loss, creating a unique form of psychological trauma that mental health professionals struggled to address effectively. Her parents, Margaret and David Mitchell, found themselves caught between hope and despair, unable to properly mourn without a body, yet tormented by the implications of the evidence that had been found. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the discovery of her belongings created a narrative that offered no closure, only deepening questions that seemed to have no rational answers. Margaret Mitchell developed severe anxiety and insomnia, reporting recurring nightmares in which she heard Sarah calling for help from somewhere unreachable, dreams so vivid she would wake convinced her daughter was trying to communicate from wherever she had gone. David Mitchell channeled his anguish into obsessive research, spending countless hours studying maps of the Smoky Mountains and developing increasingly elaborate theories about what might have happened to his daughter. The family's grief was complicated by well meaning but misguided attempts from psychics, conspiracy theorists, and amateur investigators who contacted them with their own interpretations of the evidence, each offering hope while simultaneously deepening their pain. The lack of definitive answers created a psychological limbo that prevented the normal progression of grief, leaving the Mitchell family suspended in a state of ambiguous loss that would define their lives for years to come. The broader implications of Sarah's disappearance resonated throughout the hiking and wilderness community, fundamentally altering how experienced outdoor enthusiasts approached solo adventures in remote areas. Wilderness safety organizations incorporated her case into their educational materials, using it as an example of how even experienced hikers could face circumstances beyond their control or understanding. The mysterious nature of her vanishing sparked debates about the psychological effects of isolation and whether solo hiking in certain areas posed risks that extended beyond the traditionally recognized dangers of weather, terrain, and wildlife. Some outdoor organizations began recommending buddy systems even for experienced hikers, while others advocated for advanced communication devices and more frequent check in protocols. The case also influenced the development of new safety technologies, including GPS tracking devices with emergency transmission capabilities and personal locator beacons designed specifically for dense forest environments where traditional communication methods might fail. However, these technological solutions couldn't address the deeper questions raised by Sarah's case about whether some wilderness areas might harbor dangers that conventional safety measures couldn't mitigate. The involvement of specialized forensic anthropologists in analyzing the evidence from Sarah's case revealed methodological challenges that highlighted the limitations of traditional investigative approaches in wilderness disappearances. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, brought in as a consulting expert, noted that the preservation state of Sarah's belongings suggested environmental conditions inconsistent with the known climate and ecosystem of the discovery location. Standard decomposition models, used to estimate how long organic materials had been exposed to elements, produced results that contradicted the established timeline of Sarah's disappearance. The leather components of her hiking gear showed chemical changes typically associated with much longer exposure periods, yet other materials appeared to have aged minimally, creating a forensic puzzle that challenged established scientific understanding. Pollen analysis of her clothing revealed traces of plant species not found in the immediate vicinity of either her last known location or the discovery site, suggesting she had traveled through areas not covered by search teams or had been in contact with vegetation from entirely different ecosystems. Most perplexing was the isotopic analysis of metal components from her equipment, which revealed mineral signatures that didn't match the geological composition of the Smoky Mountains region, implying exposure to environmental conditions unlike anything found in the area. The psychological evaluation of Ranger Patricia Hendricks following her discovery of Sarah's belongings revealed the profound impact that finding such evidence could have on search and rescue personnel. Hendricks, a veteran ranger with over 15 years of experience in wilderness search operations, reported experiencing severe anxiety and recurring nightmares following the discovery, symptoms that persisted despite professional counseling and medical intervention. Her detailed account of finding the items described an overwhelming sense of being watched during the discovery process, a feeling so intense that she initially called for backup despite being alone in an area supposedly devoid of human presence. The ranger's professional training had prepared her for finding human remains and personal effects, but the deliberately arranged nature of Sarah's belongings and their impossible condition created a psychological impact that standard debriefing procedures couldn't address. Hendricks became convinced that the discovery was meant to be found, that someone or something had orchestrated the placement of items specifically to communicate a message she couldn't decipher. Her subsequent requests for transfer to different park sections and eventual early retirement highlighted how exposure to unexplained phenomena could end careers and fundamentally alter the lives of dedicated public servants. The media coverage of Sarah's disappearance evolved from routine missing person reporting to intense speculation about supernatural and paranormal explanations as the mysterious details of her case became public knowledge. Initial news reports followed standard protocols for wilderness disappearances, focusing on search efforts and safety reminders for hikers. But the discovery of her belongings 6 months later transformed the narrative into something far more sensational. Television documentaries, podcasts, and online forums began examining the case through the lens of unexplained phenomena, often emphasizing the most bizarre aspects while downplaying conventional investigative approaches. This media attention brought unwanted notoriety to the Mitchell family and complicated official investigations by attracting amateur sleuths and conspiracy theorists to the area where Sarah had vanished. The Smoky Mountains National Park experienced an influx of visitors, specifically seeking to investigate the location where her belongings were found, creating safety concerns and requiring additional ranger resources to manage curiosity seekers who were often unprepared for serious wilderness conditions. The sensationalized coverage also influenced public perception of the case, making it increasingly difficult for investigators to maintain focus on factual evidence while managing public expectations for supernatural explanations. The long-term investigation into Sarah's disappearance revealed patterns and connections that suggested her case might not be isolated, but part of a broader phenomenon affecting wilderness areas throughout the region. Detective Maria Santos, assigned as the primary investigator, discovered similarities between Sarah's case and several other unsolved disappearances in national parks across the southeastern United States, patterns that had previously gone unnoticed due to jurisdictional boundaries and limited information sharing between agencies. These cases shared common elements, including experienced hikers vanishing without trace, personal belongings found in impossible locations months later, and journal entries or communications describing psychological disturbances preceding disappearances. The geographic distribution of similar cases suggested either a coordinated human effort or environmental factors affecting specific wilderness areas, though neither explanation adequately addressed all the evidence. Santos initiated informal collaboration with investigators from other jurisdictions, creating an unofficial network focused on identifying and analyzing patterns in wilderness disappearances that conventional law enforcement protocols had failed to recognize. This collaborative approach revealed that Sarah's case was part of a larger mystery that spanned multiple states and decades, suggesting that whatever had happened to her was neither random nor unique to the Smoky Mountains. The scientific community's response to Sarah's case demonstrated the challenges faced when empirical evidence contradicts established understanding of natural processes and human behavior. Researchers from various disciplines attempted to explain the anomalous aspects of her disappearance using conventional scientific principles, but their efforts consistently encountered evidence that didn't fit standard models. Psychologists proposed theories about stress induced dissociation and fugue states, but couldn't explain the physical evidence of her belongings' preservation or their impossible placement. Geologists examined the possibility of unknown cave systems or geological formations that might have provided shelter, but surveys revealed no such features in the relevant areas. Meteorologists analyzed weather patterns to determine if unusual atmospheric conditions might have affected decomposition rates or Sarah's perception of her environment, but found no anomalies that could account for the documented inconsistencies. The failure of multiple scientific disciplines to provide adequate explanations for Sarah's case highlighted the limitations of conventional academic approaches when confronted with phenomena that fell outside established parameters, leading some researchers to advocate for new methodological approaches that could address the growing number of similar unexplained cases. The development of new search and rescue protocols, specifically addressing cases like Sarah's, reflected the broader impact her disappearance had on wilderness safety procedures and emergency response strategies. The National Park Service initiated a comprehensive review of search methodologies, acknowledging that traditional approaches based on logical human behavior patterns might be inadequate for cases involving psychological disturbance or unknown environmental factors. New protocols required searchers to investigate areas previously dismissed as inaccessible, using specialized equipment and techniques developed specifically for extreme terrain conditions. Training programs for search and rescue personnel began incorporating psychological components, teaching responders to recognize signs of mental disturbance in missing persons cases and adjust search patterns accordingly. The establishment of rapid response teams equipped with advanced communication and detection technology aimed to reduce the time between disappearance and discovery, potentially preventing cases from becoming as mysterious as Sarah's. These protocol changes, while improving overall search capabilities, also acknowledge the unsettling reality that some wilderness disappearances might involve factors beyond current understanding, requiring approaches that balanced scientific methodology with acknowledgement of unknown variables. The ongoing mystery of Sarah Mitchell's fate continues to influence how the wilderness community, law enforcement, and scientific researchers approach unexplained disappearances in America's national parks. Her case has become a reference point for discussing the limitations of conventional search and rescue operations and the need for new approaches to investigating phenomena that challenge established understanding. The preservation of evidence from her case in specialized forensic facilities ensures that future technological advances might eventually provide answers that current methods cannot deliver. The psychological impact on all those involved, from her family to the investigators to the broader community, serves as a reminder of the human cost of unresolved mysteries and the importance of continued efforts to understand what happened in those remote mountains. Sarah's disappearance remains an open case, with investigators still hoping that new evidence or technological capabilities might eventually reveal the truth behind her vanishing and the mysterious discovery of her belongings. While the mystery of what happened in those Smoky Mountain woods in 1988 may never be fully understood, one thing remains clear. The wilderness holds secrets that can take decades to reveal, and sometimes what's found challenges everything we thought we knew about survival and disappearance. The Rangers' discovery that day didn't just solve a missing person case, it opened up questions that continue to haunt investigators and families alike. Whether you believe this was a case of tragic misfortune, human intervention, or something far more sinister, the truth is that our national parks remain places where people can vanish without a trace, leaving behind only fragments of their story. The Great Smoky Mountains will continue to guard their mysteries, reminding us that in nature's vastness, some answers come only when the wilderness decides to give them up.